Life is an amazing podcast, and it is presented and hosted by myself, Caro, and my sweet dog Sparky. Give it up for him. I hope you're ready. Enjoy. Alrighty, dear people, welcome back to another episode of Go For Your Life. And I have my friend Clare here, joining us from Switzerland. Bern, Switzerland. Hey. Yay. Hello, Clare. Hello.
Hello.
So this is the lovely Clare Nicholls. So I met Clare last year, pretty much, or this year, beginning of this year. It seems like 500 years ago now, the times we're living in. And I had an instant connection with Clare. She's a beautiful yoga teacher and wrote a book as well called My Soar to the Mountains, The Color and the Chaos. I love the color and the chaos. Like it's very, it's even like Claire's hair is a bit color and chaos, like mine. So thank you so much, Clare, for joining in. So yeah, maybe a little introduction. So I was saying you're a yoga teacher. You wrote this beautiful book. Yeah. Maybe we could talk a little bit about who you are and your yoga teaching. And then I definitely want to ask you some questions about the book you wrote. But tell us who you are, Clare. Tell us.
Who am I?
Who are you?
What a great question. I quite often will start my classes by asking students just to take a moment and to decide who they are today. Because, of course, who we are changes from place to place and time to time, or it seems to change. Of course, it doesn't really change. But we, most of us have to put on other faces. Okay, so who am I?
Today.
Well, I'm 40 years old. Who am I today? And actually, it's also the other thing I think when we start talking about who we are, it's so interesting. What is the first thing we do to describe ourselves? So I was about to go, I'm 40 years old. And so, okay, so obviously I am identifying with my age. That's interesting. And it's this continuous process of inquiry, self-inquiry. Mm-hmm. Okay. So I have experienced yoga since I was 6 years old. I was first introduced to the storytelling of yoga. So I encountered a production of the Mahabharata, and it was filmed for Channel 4 in the UK, and my mum videotaped it in the days of videotapes, and we watched it. We used to watch it together. And so this was my first introduction to storytelling, the stories of yoga. And I remember even as a very young child, so I must have been, I think, 6 when I first saw it and then 8 when I watched it again. There's a bit where one of the characters is asked the question, what is the greatest mystery? And they answer that we see death around us every day, but we continue to live as if we were immortal. And I remember as a kid that I was like, wow, I have no idea what that means, but
it's amazing.
Exactly. Yeah. And that kind of ignited this passion for asking those questions and continuously asking those questions. So I suppose the answer to who I am is someone who asks a lot of questions of myself and who asks questions of others as well. And that sense of continuous inquiry.
Yeah.
On a slightly more practical basis, I studied philosophy at university and then went on to study yoga asana to become a yoga instructor, because at that time, that would have been in about 2001. So at that time, the teacher training options were slightly more limited. And then I quickly discovered that the business of being a yoga teacher was very different to the ideals of being a yoga teacher. And there was a necessity to serve the needs of the community, which means you actually have to listen to what the community says. And at that time, my community said that they wanted yoga for pregnancy. Now, I was maybe 25 at that point, and I'd been teaching for a couple of years, and I really didn't know what to do with a pregnant woman. So I'm a really firm believer in education. So if I don't know what to do with something, I ask the question and I go and find out.
There's that inquiring again.
Exactly. So I went and did a yoga for pregnancy teacher training course, and then started working a lot with pregnant women. During this time, I found that many of the women I was working with didn't feel that the system that they were giving birth in, so this would have been the National Health Service, that system didn't serve them. So they came to yoga because they had an interest in the way that their bodies worked, and they educated themselves about the way that their bodies worked, and then they went into a hospital setting and found that perhaps that setting didn't support what they'd learned. So this frustrated me, and I decided that I would train as a midwife to see if there was something I could do better in terms of education, if there was some way that I could manage expectations better, and how I could, I suppose, find ways that women could use the system to their advantage. That's sort of my idea, so that they didn't have to be manipulated by the system. They could manipulate it.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
I don't mean manipulate in like a nasty
No, it's just like
that as necessarily being a bad thing.
No, I think it's like turning it upside down. Like, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, so I trained as a midwife, and for 10 years worked in a busy London birth centre, which was wonderful, and continued to teach yoga and practice yoga, obviously, as well. So for me, it wasn't really a question of one or the other. I don't really see yoga as being something that's separate from who I am.
No, and it was co-assisting alongside anyway, right? Like you were the midwife and the yoga teacher, and I think it goes really well together.
It does.
Yeah.
And then after 10 years of working in the system, I decided that I could either go independent and work as an independent midwife, or I would take a break and review where I was at. And it's interesting because at that point, the option of working as an independent midwife wasn't. It stopped being a possibility in the United Kingdom because they withdrew the insurance. So it became quite a lot more complicated. And I was tired. You know, when you work in an institution for a long time, it's really tiring. So I took a few years off, but not really off as such. I decided it was time to turn inward and to look at myself again in a very direct and practical way. So I traveled to India, and I spent 4 years traveling back from India to the United Kingdom. So I go back and forth between the two places, supplementing my life with work as a midwife for income, and then basically looking at my own personal practice. So I spent a long time looking at Sanskrit and the study of Sanskrit, and the philosophical history for yoga. And during that time, it was kind of interesting. Like the writing of the book came about because there wasn't the book. When I started imagining the journey, I was looking for a book because I like to read. I like to get information about things. And I realized that no one had written the book that I wanted to read. Because I wanted to read a book by a woman about traveling in India as a woman, but without the fluffy clouds and rainbows. Like I wanted to actually read a book about what it was to be a practitioner of yoga.
Yeah.
And I mean, of course there's an element of going out to find oneself. And all of my friends were laughing because they were like, oh, you're having your eat, pray, love moment. But I think for me, it was more about a sense of respect for the teachings that I'd lived with for so long. I knew these teachings. I knew this philosophy. I knew these stories.
And was that also that also really like inspired you to go to India? Was it because of that? Like India was really calling you because of that?
Definitely. Yeah. It was. I mean, it was. The timing was right.
Yeah.
In the sense that I was ready to place like a hold on where I was at in terms of career. And yeah, and so it was time. It's funny because I'd obviously always wanted to go and pay respect to the stories and have a sense of the source of the teaching, but it had never felt right. And so it was just a good timing. Really.
Yeah.
But then what was really interesting to me and quite surprising was the passion for the practice turned back into a very simple desire to share. And this was the most profound difference for me as a teacher of yoga. So that it's, I think when I first started, it was very much because, as I think many people who become yoga teachers, we start from this place of, this has made me feel good, I would like to help other people feel good. I think it has a very altruistic intention.
Yeah.
But then sometimes it sort of, I wouldn't say it gets lost, but it becomes a little bit more challenging. And this is what I meant when I was sort of talking about like the business of and the ideals of are two slightly different things. Yeah. But when I realized that I didn't want to make my living as a yoga teacher, that I just wanted to share the experience, and actually it's share the experiences I'd had. And not share just the teachings or share just the philosophy, but share my direct personal experiences of the manifestation of that philosophy. Which is really interesting because right at the beginning of the Yoga Sutras, this is one of the things that Patanjali talks about in terms of how we get knowledge.
Yeah.
Through listening to other people share their experiences. And yeah, so I found that I wanted to share those experiences, which is another thing about writing the book. But then, really interestingly, offers to teach just started to pour in. So at that point, at exactly the point that I felt I didn't want to make my living as a teacher, I wanted to be a practitioner who shared, the universe suggested that a practitioner who shared is just another name for a teacher.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is beautiful. Before we